Good morning. Good morning. So for those of you who are online joining us, welcome. And for those of you who are here, good to see you. So let's begin with silence as we do. Take a deep breath or two. May grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in our mouths and in our speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our ends and at our departing. And may what happens in this gathering benefit all people everywhere on this planet that belongs not to us, but to you. Amen. So, as you know, I am on my summer break from teaching, and we have a great lineup of people who are going to come and speak. And the first person doesn't need any introduction, so I'm not going to introduce her. No, seriously. I was thinking that ordinary life, which is not me, but those of you who are gathered here, would likely not exist, certainly would not exist in the way that it is today without Dr. Holly Hudley. And the reason I say that is that a number of years ago, it became apparent that I needed some help in teaching, and we put together a group of people who were going to assist in that, and it kind of filtered out that Holly was one of the people who would step in from time to time, and we would either co-teach together or she would teach in my absence. And we had an event, we did that, we hit that rhythm, and then we had a little event that occurred that some of you might remember called COVID. And on the Sunday the first Sunday after the shutdown, Holly and I were already scheduled to teach. And so we came and taught. I think William Budge was here. I think Tim was here. I remember that Larry Walters was sitting on the steps to the cathedral across the way telling people they couldn't go in. And we thought that would last for 2 or 3 weeks. And the COVID shutdown in Houston lasted over 340 days. And every Sunday, with very few exceptions, during that time, Holly came, gave her time, sat with me, we taught together. She did it without any remuneration, but we were here every Sunday speaking to an empty room, actually speaking to each other. But it would have been impossible to do that without her. During that time, Holly has received her doctorate, and she's become an expert in the Enneagram. She's the spiritual director. She's an artist, and most of all, she is my very, very, very dear friend. Holly Hudley, come and speak.
Thank you. During that 340 days, we didn't hug at all. Like, we were 6 feet away from each other during the entire time, which was bizarre. So here I am. Thank you. Good morning. My iPad decided to close, so let me open it. One moment. There we go. Hi. It's good to see y'all. It's more fun to sit than it is to stand. I can see why exhaustion ensues after Bill teaches up here every week. So I love being here with y'all, and I'm grateful you're here, and I'm delighted to stand in for Bill so that he gets a little bit of rest. I'm calling this time together today hope in one hand and despair in the other. It seems like many of us, particularly right now, feel caught in this kind of yo-yo. between the two. So I hope that I'll offer or shed some light on how to be in this tension with a little more awareness. I love etymology, and these words, hope and despair in English, are so different, but they're really similar in the original Latin. Sperare means to hope, and desperare means to despair, or to be without hope. A two-letter difference, not just in sound, but these words are intimately yoked in experience as well. One cannot exist without the other. Despair, when we're in it, produces a new kind of hope when there's nothing left to fear. And when we step into this tension, we can completely surrender to both hope and despair. And that's where transformation is possible. Despair is like the dark soil from which mature, resilient hope grows. They're braided strands of the human soul who faces suffering. And I would venture to say that every human soul eventually faces suffering. I've never felt more despair, for example, when I realize I'm powerless to remedy a situation, especially with my kids. And having kids gives me plenty of opportunity to be humble to my inability to fix a situation. When I surrender to it, I'm then witness to their growth, to the magical work of my healing and my continued pursuit of growing up. I hear many of you say that you come to ordinary life trying to find hope in trying times. We hope for inspiration and stamina for times such as this. We despair because our social bonds feel fractured. We hope to find solidarity among like-minded folks. We despair that nothing we say or do feels like enough. We hope when hundreds of people show up to march or for a pride lunch or to bind together over a cause, but we despair as more people die or disappear. With this constantly shifting pendulum, it's easy to wonder about our personal ability to affect change, to speak eloquently to despair, and to rebuild from the broken parts. We might wonder if our hope is strong enough to hold. In a way, since the age of discovery, which is the time in human history when ships were built large enough to sail vast oceans and discover new lands. They weren't new, but the age of discovery is when we were remapping the world. America has been an experiment that's been watched by everyone. How might a modern democracy work? What does freedom and justice for all look like? Who was the all in that sentence? For some of the population, America was a hopeful venture, one that would finally free us from the confines of an oppressive monarchy. For others, it was harmful and despairing. I got an email from an old friend the other day, one I haven't seen in probably 20 years, who asked a group of folks to consider these two questions for a project he's working on. What would the US Constitution look like if it were written today? And how different would it be if written by a broad cross-section of the population, instead of just white, male, property-owning elite, who represent, at that time, and still today, less than 10% of the population? The latter is obviously not what happened, but they are really good questions to consider. I think hopeful ones. Speaking of questions, you've heard me say that my oldest son is one of the reasons that I got a PhD, because I could no longer keep up with his questions. But he's fond of asking me things like, Mom, do you think human life is significant at all in the grand scheme of the universe? Mom, do you think human life will be around even after a million years? Or do you think we'll destroy ourselves? This is like over breakfast, y'all. This is before I have coffee. So my best answer recently sounded something like, no, I don't think we're that significant in the whole grand scheme of things. But I don't think we're inconsequential, especially to life here on Earth. I really think it's quite incredible that we are here at all, able to ask those kinds of questions. We may only ever understand this tiny fraction of our infinite universe, but it is our tiny fraction. It's our piece. You go to an art museum. I was just in Chicago. I'll talk about that in a minute. Last weekend, and we were at the Chicago Art Institute, where they have a collection of fantastic objects, just like the museum across the street. But you see these objects intact after thousands of years. And what strikes me is this creative compulsion that humans have always had. Our need to create beauty, to create a statement about the world we're living in, from the most spectacular to the most rudimentary mark. This, to me, is the most incredible thing about being human. How we see and mirror the world and our experience in it through art, both visual, spoken, music, all of it. I'm a visual artist, so that's my medium. I'm amazed that we've been doing that for as long as we have. Alan Lightman, a physicist and writer, some of you might have read some of his books, wrote an article recently for The Atlantic. And actually for The Atlantic, it's a rather short article. It's not a novel like many of theirs are. And it's called The Ordinary Miracle of Existing. He makes the point that our widening perspective, for instance, learning really only quite recently, that we live in a galaxy whose size is so beyond comprehension, so huge, that it would take a light ray traveling at 186,000 miles per second, 100,000 years to cross from one end of the Milky Way to the other. 186,000 miles per second, if a light ray is traveling that fast, would take 100,000 years to travel from one side of the Milky Way to the other. It's pretty incredible. So this new awareness that we have is also cause for deep wonder. He might say to my oldest, yeah, we're insignificant, which is sort of despairing, but we're also absolute miracles of existence. Pretty hopeful. Did you know, here's a little sex ed for you, that an average human female makes about 300,000 eggs during her fertile period? And that each male ejaculate, that's a word you don't hear in church very much, consists of about 300 million sperm. From those numbers, those alone, just like traveling across the Milky Way, there are about 100,000 billion unique and different human beings that could result from a single sex act. Yet you're the one sitting here. You are right here in this room. We're each much rarer than a winning lottery ticket. Has anyone in this room ever won the lottery? Nope. Okay, that's what I thought. Our mere existence in the grand scheme of things gives me hope in the midst of despair. We are miraculous. When I consider this, say, alongside someone like Jesus, about whom so many miracles are told, I'm like, this is a person who just embraced his status of the miracle of being alive. And he really, I think, tried to imbue that sensibility into everyone around him. You are a miracle, and you are a miracle, and you are capable of performing them. So Jesus, a Jewish mystic, and Lightman, a Jewish physicist, both seem to be saying the same thing. Miracles abound, and we need to pay attention. In this article, I think Lightman has a strong practice of Buddhism, of meditation, and his general philosophy seems to be oriented around that. But he mentions a Buddhist meditation retreat in which he learned the concept of retinue. It's the entourage or the constellation of people who influence our lives. They are living and dead. One of mine, of course, sits in this room. Alan Lightman is also in my retinue. I love the way that he has this extraordinary ability to make physics both attainable and magical. Lightman suggests gathering images of these people who have influenced us and making a kind of gratitude board. I'll keep adding to mine today, especially of those who have taught me how to hold this tension of hope and despair. So my same son who asks all the hard questions right now he loves film. He wants to be a filmmaker when he grows up. He's on a Steven Spielberg kick right now, which is like, I don't know, 80 films strong. And he says he wants to watch every Steven Spielberg movie ever made in a row. But we watched Shawshank Redemption together the other night. That's what he's up to. If you haven't seen it, or even if you have, go rewatch it. It is a study in the very essence of hope and despair. That movie results, if you might remember, in a transformation. In it, Andy, who is Tim Robbins' character, and Red, Morgan Freeman's character, have a conversation about hope after Andy gets out of solitary confinement for 2 months for tricking the guards and playing opera for the entire courtyard of prisoners. He somehow manages to get the opera to be loud enough for everyone to hear from the office of the warden. So he comes back from solitary, and I'll put the dialogue up here. Andy says to Red, "That's the beauty of music, Red. They can't get that from you. Haven't you ever felt that way?" Red says, "I played a mean harmonica as a younger man. I lost interest in it, though. Doesn't make much sense in here." Andy says, "Here is where it makes the most sense. You need it so that you don't forget." Forget what? Forget that there are places in this world that aren't made of stone, that there's something inside they can't get to, that they can't touch. That's yours. Red says, "What are you talking about?" Hope. What Andy's saying is that it's our birthright, it's our very essence, that's what keeps us alive. It is deep, and it is the net that holds despair. We've talked in here before about the difference between kind of wise hope and maybe a wistful hope. Wistful hope might say something like, "I hope it doesn't rain as storm clouds are broiling in the west," or "I hope racism and poverty go away," while refusing to actively tend to it. Another member of my constellation is a female philosopher, Simone Weil. She believes self-interested hope to be a dangerous illusion that distracts us from reality and seeks to escape pain rather than face it. Hope, she argues, should not bypass despair. She says, "The virtue of hope is an orientation of the soul toward a transformation, after which it will be wholly and exclusively grounded in love." Genuine spiritual depth means looking into that void rather than fleeing from it. And in those spaces is where grace enters. To me, this is the whole meaning of the cross, this ability to hold hope and despair. Active hope looks at a situation with clear eyes and sees it for what it is, but chooses to step in anyway, just because it's the right thing to do. Active hope is sober. I define sobriety as being with what is. Here's another star in my constellation, Joanna Macy. Her aptly titled book, Active Hope, is a practice, not a wish. She insists that our grief, this is a book recommendation, by the way. I do recommend this book. It's really oriented in Buddhism, but it is so how to be present without losing hope. She also insists that our grief and hope for the world go together, to face our pain and angst instead of turning away from them, help us to care more deeply. Then we can roll our sleeves up and take steps towards healing without attachment to outcome or making it about our own ego gratification. Her prayer, which I'll read for us, manages to sit in that tension between despair and hope. She doesn't shy away from the human-made despair, nor does she deny the reality of death and suffering in this prayer. Instead, she calls us to tend to it so that we may usher forth a more promising future. Her prayer is called A Prayer for Future Beings. You live inside us, beings of the future. In the spiral ribbons of our cells, you are here. In our rage for the burning forests, the poisoned fields, the oil-drowned seals, you are here. You beat in our hearts through late-night meetings. You accompany us to clear cuts and toxic dumps, in the halls of the lawmakers, It is you who drive our dogged labors to save what is left. O you who will walk the earth when we are gone, stir us awake. Behold through our eyes the beauty of this world. Let us feel your breath in our lungs, your cry in our throat. Let us see you in the poor, the homeless, the sick. Haunt us with your hunger. Hound us with your claims, that we may honor the life that links us. You have as yet no face we can see, no names we can say, but we need only hold you in our mind, and you teach us patience. You attune us to measures of time where healing can happen, where soil and souls can mend. You reveal courage within us we had not expected, love we had not yet owned. O you who come after, help us remember we are your ancestors. Fill us with gladness for the work that must be done. This prayer makes me think of the Native American tradition of 7 generations, where we gather wisdom from 7 generations before us for the 7 generations that come after us. It's timeless thinking in a way. Speaking of hope, my family and I, as I said, we went to Chicago last weekend to the Obama Presidential Center. My husband, I think it's impossible to get tickets, am I right? So I learned they issue a couple dozen every Wednesday. So you can go on Wednesdays. You can also buy a membership and you are given tickets. But my husband, like the second they went on sale, he's right there. And would have been there on the opening day on Juneteenth, but I kind of nixed it because I was like, that crowd is going to be unbelievable. Anyway, so we went this last weekend, and we reveled in what it felt like to have as much hope as we did 18 years ago. It feels impossible that was 18 years ago, but we didn't have kids then. I joke that all my babies are Obama babies. Anyway, Obama had this ability to stand in moments of incredible grief. The Emanuel Church massacre, for example, in South Carolina, and still make us feel like better things were possible. He spoke against gun violence and racism, and then he sang an impromptu Amazing Grace with the mourners. 2 days before that shooting, he made marriage equality possible. Hope and despair. Their surviving family members and witnesses to that horrific event were themselves incredible examples of standing in the tension of hope and grief. Many of them showed up to Dylann Roof's sentencing, and here are some of their words from that day in the courtroom. I forgive you. You took something precious from me, but I forgive you, and I have mercy upon your soul. I forgive you. My family forgives you. May God forgive you. Every fiber in my body hurts, and I will never be the same. But may God have mercy on you. In the depths of incredible pain, some of these folks were able to express their hurt while offering hope. Our task, beyond their courageous forgiveness, is to continue to interrogate the systems, the institutions, and the practices that allow these tragedies to keep occurring, to challenge a country whose commitment to freedom stands in stark contrast to its love of violence. Our task is to have a better conversation about racism, why Black and brown people continue to be the primary target of American violence, without succumbing to the fear that every critique of America is unpatriotic. We can love a thing and still demand that it be better. I think critique of our systems is necessary to continue to evolve democracy and freedom. At the center, I teared up at least 3 times, just that some of the speeches are in different rooms and broadcast over the loudspeakers. His inaugural and his departing words are kind of the surround sound as you enter. Much of the museum, however, is an homage to people's movements and to community organizing. It's not just about Obama. It's about what people have done over time to change things. In his farewell address, as he handed the presidency over to Trump's first term, from whom we have heard very few words of compassion and humility, he said, I'm asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours. It seems we need an extra dose of that right now. I remember being in the back room of my good friend's house as we watched the 2008 votes roll in. Until all of them were accounted for, we felt a little afraid to hope too hard, but we kept our fingers crossed and our breath held. You might recall that Obama ran on a campaign of hope. This is right at the entry of the center. But I suspect as the first Black president, he knew the reality he faced. He could not afford to be blind. He knew he had to walk a very tight line. We learned that Obama had more security than any other president-elect because of the sheer volume of the threats he faced. I remember that night that he was elected, my husband held me and said, "The president gets a lineup just like me," which is a haircut that is very common among Black men. That is an edge up or a lineup. It's a very clean, crisp look. They share a slice of their Saturday morning barbershop routine. To see that in the president was super powerful for him. I remember exhaling just a little bit because my children would be brought, whatever children I would have, were coming into a world where they could imagine president as a job title. For a while, it felt like the world could be righted. I wept because I felt the joy and hope of that year, alongside the grief of what has followed. We've been through a lot. The work of democracy, though, has always been hard, contentious, and bloody, but in spite of our national failures, we seem to remain a striving people. One of my other folks in my retinue is Robert Bellah. He's a sociologist and kind of a public theologian as well. He envisioned a civic religion around which we could all unite. And he has a book called The Broken Covenant, in which he writes, "The recognition of the broken covenant does not mean the rejection of an American past, but to acknowledge that there have always been Americans at every point in our history who have tried to pick up the broken pieces, tried to start again, tried once more to build an ethical society in the light of a transcendent ethical vision." So what is our transcendent vision? Bellah made the case that our shared sacred text in this country is not the Bible, but the Declaration of Independence. Like many sacred documents, the ideals exceed our ability or our commitment to fulfill them. That said, we still seem to have, as Americans, and maybe even especially down here in Texas, a kind of do-it-yourself grittiness to us. A tendency to get under the hood and tinker with the engine until we right things. Even if we mess it up along the way, we still try. When I was away from Houston last weekend, this news story came into my feed that some of you may have heard, that a car with 3 people in it had careened off the ramp on 59. This is not a great image, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the cross-section of people who came. So this car careens off the ramp and lands upside down on the lanes below. It's such a Houston thing to me that no fewer than 5 people stopped to get the stuck people out with whatever tools they had. Emergency services had been called, but white, brown, Black men all show up with tools just to try and help pry these people out. Against the backdrop of the tragic killing of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo by ICE agents, this was a miraculous vision. A healing right there on the side of Highway 59 and Beltway 8. Hope in one hand and despair in another. We are a complicated folk, y'all. Over the last decade or so of deteriorating social bonds, my physical station in life has not changed. I am quite lucky. I'm a citizen. I'm a white person. I'm well off enough. I'm educated. I could, if I wanted to, choose not to look under the hood. It's more the psychic field that feels incredibly changed to me. That the question I am constantly running around with is, who can I trust? Who can trust me? What are my best uses of my resources, both time and money? I have an acquaintance, an artist, who is staging a one-woman protest against ICE by visiting local Catholic masses and taking note of which ones speak out against the treatment of immigrants, violence, deportation, encampment, family estrangement. And for the ones that do, she is adding them to a list she calls Hildegard's list, another person in my retinue. Hildegard of Bingen was sometimes referred to as the unruly saint. I love that. I would take that title. She studied history, poetry, cosmology, and she had profound visions. That might be what you know of her. She would have these dreams and visions that we would call insane today. But she wrote about them and shared them. In the 1100s, she spoke out against church hypocrisy when women were hardly encouraged to speak at all, much less about clerical corruption. She wrote tomes on medical cures found in nature, and her general philosophy was that every human being is a vital spark of God and should be extended care, healing, and kindness. I read that she got in trouble for offering absolution to someone who had not yet converted, but she swore up and down that God had saved his soul. She got in trouble for burying him in the churchyard. She treated every person who came through her convent with dignity. And gradually, and my guess is secretly, popes and emperors began to seek her counsel. She was radical because she spoke truth to power, and she deeply trusted the power of healing. When my artist acquaintance encounters churches that don't pray for or mention the plight of immigrants, including Spanish language ones, she waits after the service and she speaks to the priests about their silence. She confronts them. Most of them, it seems, point up the ladder toward people with more power than they and say, we're told not to speak about it. But she asks, isn't Pope Leo your highest authority on earth? Even he speaks against our treatment of immigrants. You might remember that in the fall, this criticism of this administration's inhumane treatment of immigrants sparked a war of words between Trump and the Pope that was punctuated by J.D. Vance said that he didn't think the Pope was qualified to speak on matters of Scripture. Let's hold that for a second. So this friend is also creating hand-painted signs that demand justice for Lorenzo Salgado. She lives in West U, and if you grew up in West U or live there, you might imagine that the support for her endeavor is mixed. In spite of the fact that most of West U was developed by the children cared for by Latinos with varying citizenship status. One neighbor threw her sign back over her fence into her backyard. Another wrote her a critical letter asking her to consider the children. Cars have started to drive slowly by her home, and one neighbor even sent a drone over her house to observe what she was doing. And other neighbors brought their children by so that they could receive an education from an artist. And even some of them began to help make signs, one of which read, "Ice is mean." Hope and despair. Should I give you time to answer? No, I'm just kidding. The mess we're in has me thinking a lot about what it actually means to love our neighbor, what it means to welcome the stranger, to treat others as we long to be treated. These questions need our urgent attention. I don't know if anyone's seen The Odyssey in here. Like the poem, it is an epic movie. So they filmed it on, I learned this from my son, they filmed it on IMAX cameras, which have a maximum running time of 3 hours. The movie is 2 hours and 59 minutes. So they left a lot out, but they got the maximum running time. And as I watched, I had to reach way back into my 9th grade learning of Greek mythology, and I had forgotten that among Zeus's laws were to provide hospitality, food, drink, a bath, and rest before asking a stranger's name or business. Provide first. Second, treat any visitor, kings, beggars, wanderers alike, with total comfort as long as they are under your roof. That's why Penelope was obliged to be hospitable to her suitors. But she was tricky, y'all. She was like the quintessential idea of feminine kind of wiliness. She wove every night and then undid the threads, wove every night and then undid the threads. For 20 years, she did this. And then offer a parting gift when the guest leaves. Not how I remembered Zeus. As Bill and I are both fond of saying, though, this is not just a Jesus message, and it wasn't the way because Jesus walked it. Jesus walked it because it was the way. Zeus had that way also. I think of Zeus as this vengeful god who raped mortals and pops babies out of his head and then eats them if they wrong him. But so in my memory, he more mirrors that Old Testament type of God that is ultimately transformed by love and healing. But instead, I learned that Zeus is, at least in part, a paragon of hospitality. Even he knew how to treat the stranger, which was a message carried over by Jesus. And the similarities between Greek mythology and what we know of as the Christian scriptures do not end there. The concept, for example, of logos and the Trinity came from Greek philosophical ideas. The Gospel of John describes Jesus as the Word or logos made flesh, which was an ancient concept rooted in Stoic philosophy and Neoplatonism. To the Greeks, logos was the organizing principle of the cosmos, and the universe was viewed as a cohesive, interconnected organism. Jesus, and all beings actually, are the energies of the cosmos made flesh. Even our traditional visual interpretations of a bearded god trace back to statues and images of Zeus. And Jesus as a shepherd is directly inspired by the likes of someone like Hermes carrying his sheep. The Greco-Roman world was accustomed to the idea of sons of gods. There were lots of them in Greek myths. Demigods born of a mortal mother and a powerful deity. Poseidon, god of the sea, had so many children. Cyclops was one of the children of Poseidon. Part something and part something. I don't know. Part monster, part human, and part Poseidon? I'm not sure. Anyways, there was already a cultural acceptance of various figures having both divine and human characteristics. Concepts of hell as a literal place were informed by stories of the Greek underworld. We saw the visit to Hades in the underworld in the Odyssey. Greek mythology was accustomed to these fantastical beasts, and we kid ourselves if we think that the Bible is not also full of them. Multi-faced angels. Did you know most cherubim are pictured with thousands of eyeballs? My son loves to tell me that that angels were so terrifying, they were giant eyeballs with wings. Yeah. Seven-headed dragons, composite creatures with blended traits, these are in the Bible too. So many of the Greek myths, not unlike the Jesus story, are also rooted in the archetype of the hero's journey, the structure of which reflects both our psychological and spiritual transformation. Odysseus, his journey was a hero's journey. So in the hero's journey, we move from the ordinary world through a crisis into an unknown space and end when the transformation happens and we return home. The hero starts out with a lot of idealistic hope, moves through despair, which we often call the dark night of the soul, and ends up hopefully with a wiser, more realistic hope. I know I've mentioned this image as one of my favorites, but it's worth repeating here. One of the most profound images of Jesus to me is when he receives a kiss from Judas, his betrayer. This is Giotto's version of the kiss of Judas. Jesus, often called the light of the world, a symbol of hope and love, takes in the darkness of despair and betrayal. Some say that Judas is not a historical figure, but a representative of that shadow. And when Jesus takes it in, he's effectively made whole by his ability to hold both the light and the dark. From a Jungian perspective, it's an illustration of transformation when we can hold the tension of opposites. This possibility is not only reside in Jesus, but in all of us. That's our growth, that's our work. The Greek myths are wonderful in reminding us that tragedy and beauty and hope and despair live alongside one another. You've heard of Newton's third law of motion, right? For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I think that's true emotionally and psychologically as well. I don't know how many people who walk willingly and, into despair. Yes, I'll take that, no problem. But according to Newton's law, the force of your hope would be equal but opposite of the force of your despair. And that theory tracks with Jung's concept of the opposites. We need opposing forces to grow. His law might be stated something like, the greater the contrast, the greater the potential. Same idea. Another person in my retinue is Carl Jung. So when we hold both, psyche, or our soul, offers a third force called creativity. It finds a way to surface when we allow the demands of each thing to exist, not when we want hope to overwhelm despair, but when we can hold them equally. Holding that sometimes intense pressure without turning away fosters a natural healing process in the mind, giving birth to fresh resolution that transcends the original plan. Jung called that third thing the transcendent function. When we can learn to tolerate despair while keeping a quiet and holy space for hope, it stretches our endurance, and it frankly keeps us from projecting our inner wars onto others. Even though my larger point is that hope and despair is more of a psychic journey than an action to take, I know us well enough to know that people will ask, but then how do I do it? I'm so glad you asked. I have a list for you. Some ways that you can practice holding this tension of opposites, just even the nature of breathing is holding the tension of opposites, constriction and expansion. So when we tend to the breath mindfully, we're in an act of holding opposites, constriction and expansion. If you hold your breath for too long, what happens? You want to let it go. If you exhale for too long, you feel breathless. So that your own body knows how to do this. Body scans. Anyone familiar with these? When we can lay down at night, for example, and observe our bodies and just sort of take a practice of where we're holding tension. Shoulders, neck, back, legs, hips. We can bring breath and attention into that part of our body. So the practice of noticing your body is helpful in holding the tension of opposites. Journal. I have been a journaler since, I'm not saying this just because it's true for me, but it's wisdom passed along by many of the people in my map. Journaling has been a lifelong practice for me since I was 8 years old. I still journal every morning. I write my dreams or other things, mostly dreams now. But it is practice. It's just a way of getting things from here into the paper, and there's something that happens between that transaction that allows freedom. You don't have to say anything smart. You just write. Making your own version of art about despair and hope. Getting to know the language of feelings. For me, that's been the study of nonviolent communication, which offers a feelings and a needs wheel. And I used to keep one kind of on the refrigerator of our house. And how do you feel today? Fine. That's not a feeling. Look at the wheel. I know, Pam. So with this commitment to getting to know our feelings, that our body can hold multiple things at once, and even in the same moment, hold something like despair and hope in the same moment. And then commit to an inquiry about understanding these feelings. Amidst all of this, it is also so important to do small things that bring you joy, even when the world is on fire, especially when the world is on fire. To point back to Red and Andy's conversation, the harmonica that Red used to play in his life before prison was more important in jail than it was outside. There's always a butterfly to notice. There is always a seed to plant, a baby to hold, a dog to pet. There is always joy available. And for me, it's write poetry. At least read poetry. Write poetry even badly, kind of like journaling badly. Just do it. You can make the most rudimentary poem. anyone has ever seen. The shortest poem that ever existed actually was by Muhammad Ali, and it just goes, me, we. You can write that. Poetry has this incredible ability, in my opinion, to get at depth quickly. So I'll close with one of my favorite poems by one of my favorite authors, Clint Smith. I'll make another book recommendation. It's not pictured in the slide, but if you have not read How the Word is Passed, it is an incredible book. He's trained as a poet. His story's really cool, actually. He grew up in New Orleans and was a kid in high school in Katrina, and he was moved to Houston, where he completed high school and was pretty unhappy because shifting homes at that point at your junior year of high school is really hard. He ended up actually going to the school where my husband worked, Audi International. Not when my husband worked there, but it's just kind of a cool connection. They're both from New Orleans. They both have they're braided in some way. Clint Smith is brilliant. He's a poet. How the Word is Passed is a very poetic take on the many complications of our history. And it's beautiful. So his poem is called All at Once, and I'll read slowly as a closing prayer. The redwoods are on fire in California. A flood submerges a neighborhood that sat quiet on the coast for 3 centuries. A child takes their first steps and tumbles into a father's arms. 2 people in New Orleans fall in love under an oak tree whose branches bend like sorrow. A forest of seeds are planted in new soil. A glacier melts into the ocean, and the sea climbs closer to the land. A man comes home from war and holds his son for the first time. A man is killed by a drone that thinks his jug of water is a bomb. Your best friend relapses and isn't picking up the phone. Your son's teacher calls to say he stood up for another boy in class. A country below the equator ends a 20-year civil war. A soldier across the Atlantic fires the shot that begins another. The scientists find a vaccine that will save millions of people's lives. Your mother's cancer has returned, and doctors say there is nothing they can do. There is a funeral procession in the morning and a wedding in the afternoon. The river that gives us water to drink is the same one that might wash us away. It's a beautiful one. Thank you guys for being here. And as Bill always says, remember that no matter what you do or where you go this week, you carry precious cargo, so watch your step.